So in these lessons we'll have a think about sovereignty, and sovereignty is often something that you hear politicians talking about. Sometimes the difference between sovereignty, a sovereign nation, and a nation state can get a little bit confusing, but they're quite simple to understand and they are interrelated with each other. So first of all, we'll think about the sovereign state. But before we give you a definition, I'd like you to have a look by clicking on this link here, which will take you to the Google map through to the Google map of Western Sahara. And in particular, we're interested in the dotted line between Western Sahara and Morocco. Pause the video, have a look and think, what exactly does this dotted line mean? Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video and had a look at that Google map. So here you can see, in the case of the Western Sahara and Morocco, Western Sahara attempts to recognise itself as a sovereign state. Unfortunately for Western Sahara, it's not actually recognised as a separate country by the United Nations or by Morocco. It is considered to be a part of Morocco. So if you have a look at the notes at the bottom, there are two things I've added to the notes at the bottom. The first one says that a sovereign state has established boundaries, and the state is the map. And this appears to be quite simple, but quite often there is a lot of dispute over the exact boundaries of a country. But in most cases, and for the most part of most countries, the map is the same as the state, although there are some arguments over particularly border areas. Sovereignty. What sovereignty means is that country has complete control over its internal affairs and doesn't have to answer to any external force. A nation state is slightly different. You can have a sovereign state which is not a nation state. So what is a nation state? A nation state is a sovereign state which is recognised by the United Nations as controlling all of its own internal affairs. But in a nation state, something more bonds people together. What bonds people together is some unifying factor. And they quite often are a language. If it's not a language, it can be a common ancestry. So, for example, if we take the example of Nepal, Nepal did not exist as a state before about the 18th century. In the 18th century, it did start to emerge as a nation state. That is a state that is, in the case of Nepal, the state is kept together by the Nepalese language, or for at least most of the people. Now you might think that questions of nation state and sovereignty and issues with nation state are restricted to less economically developed countries. Here very much, I'm so sorry if you're from Belgium, but here very much we can see in the example here of Belgium, which is a country which really does not work as a nation state. It's not unified by language, it's not unified by politics. So have a look at this video and think to yourself, while Belgium is a sovereign state, if you ignore the complications of the European Union, is it a nation state? So I've already touched on the issue of the European Union, and this is certainly an area that some countries do feel they have a loss of sovereignty. The United Kingdom is a part of the European Union, and actually technically the UK is not a sovereign state because it is answerable to European laws, and the European Court is the final court of appeal. So if you break a crime and you feel that you've been unjustly tried, it can go to the European Court, and the European Court can either support or overrule a judgment made by the United Kingdom. So here we can see that there is some challenges to a the concept of sovereignty. Again, we quite often like to think that countries are quite static and quite recent. In fact, many countries have not been around for very long. Yugoslavia would be a very good example of that. Back when I was at school, which is a long, long time ago, Yugoslavia did actually dissolve as a nation state. And it's dissolved into what some people would call the former Yugoslavian states. Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and a few others. So Really, we can trace the concept of a state back to the 1600s. Before that, states didn't really exist. A sovereign state didn't really exist in the concept that we have now. So we can trace the concept of a sovereign state back to the Treaty of Westphalia in the 1600s. Again, if we have a look at this, some states have only some states have been around for a long time, but they've only recently embraced the concept of a nation state. Papua New Guinea is a great example. Do have a look at this video. We spent some time looking at Papua New Guinea. So have a think there. Papua New Guinea as a nation state is quite a new concept, and they are still having quite a lot of trouble binding that country together in a unified sovereign whole. They are 192 members of the United Nations. I think that number may have changed, what with South Sudan and a couple of new republics in the Pacific Ocean. About 194 now. There are countries that we would see as countries that maintain that they have their own sovereignty that actually don't exist. And one of the largest of these is Taiwan. Undoubtedly, we've got some Taiwanese passport holders in our school. Taiwan as a country does not exist. And I was quite surprised that there's a whole list of places that which we would consider countries, nations even that technically don't exist. And we're talking about nations and countries here with their own language, their own tax system, their own money, their own governance, but they technically don't exist. On top of that, there are the microstates. These are tiny, tiny sovereign states. Some examples of these would be Liechtenstein and Malta. It's a sovereign state, but they have a very, very small population. Very, very small land area. The smallest sovereign state, microstate in the world is the Vatican City with 826 citizens. Something for you to have a think about, quite a small country there. So moving on, nation states are developing all the time. In particular, an area where we've had a lot of nation states claim that they exist are in the former Russian republics. And a really good example of these is Transnistria. There are other alternative names, but watch the video. Really, the CNN video here is a very, very good one. Watch that through and think about those questions of what makes up an independent state. A really good example here for us, of course, would be Hong Kong. We've had the recent Hong Kong democracy demonstrations, and very much there's a feeling that Hong Kong likes to think of itself as a separate nation state. But of course we are not. We have a degree of autonomy. We're a semi-autonomous state. Technically we're a special administrative zone, but we're still part of China. Hong Kong is not a sovereign state because it's not in control of its own defence. Hong Kong does not have an army. It's the People's Liberation Army that provides military protection for us. A lot of Hong Kong people would feel very differently about that. A lot of Hong Kong people would support the People's Liberation Army, but equally there are a lot of people in Hong Kong, as we saw with the democracy riots, that really, really want a greater degree of sovereignty. So have a look at here. This video here is the national anthem of China, which you will hear at 6 o'clock every day on the TV, and there's a little music video there on Hong Kong. Finally, you don't have to watch all of this. It's just a little bit of the Chinese political machinery that is reinforced that Hong Kong is a part of China and not an independent state, and certainly not a member of the British Empire.